things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there. Good morning, everybody. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Miroki on your TV, radio and online. We're with you all the way through until midday with an action-packed show. But, of course, today is all about you, isn't it? It's your show.
Yes, it is. And make sure you get in touch with your views on the usual email, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Absolutely. Yes, that email again, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll go to those throughout the show. But first, it's time for your latest news.
A very good morning. It's just 1 minute past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. NATO's Secretary-General says the decision to make Sweden and Finland members of the alliance will happen at an unprecedented pace. Well, it's after Turkey lifted its veto over both Nordic countries' bid for membership. Well, the UK Prime Minister is in Madrid for the NATO summit. He says this is a huge step forward.
Vladimir Putin was hoping that he would be getting less NATO on his western front as a result of his unprovoked illegal invasion of Ukraine. He's been proved completely wrong. He's getting more NATO. This is a historic summit in many ways, but we've already got two new members coming in, Finland and Sweden. A huge step forward for our alliance.
Meanwhile, the US has announced plans to boost its military presence across Europe, including sending 2 additional F-35 squadrons to Britain and 2 more destroyers to Spain. President Joe Biden says he's responding to the changing threat.
Together, our allies, we're going to make sure that NATO is ready to meet threats from all directions across every domain, land, air, and the sea. In a moment when Putin has shattered peace in Europe, and attacked the very, very tenets of rule-based order, the United States and our allies, we're going to step up.
The head of Bowel Cancer UK has told us that Dame Deborah Jones was an inspiration who leaves a phenomenal legacy after turning her cancer diagnosis into a force for good. The podcaster known as Bowel Babe died yesterday, aged 40, just 5.5 years after being diagnosed with incurable bowel cancer. Donations to the fund she set up for cancer research have now hit £6.8 million. Speaking on her podcast, Dame Deborah convinced listener Margaret Mukhtar to check out her symptoms. Margaret was then diagnosed, treated and survived bowel cancer.
I was messaging her, and she was messaging back. She had lots of followers, but she was just so kind and so sweet. And was giving me advice when I was in hospital, saying, what was your, what was the size of your tumour? And actually, when we met up, she was so lovely. She was like, come in the picture, let's take a selfie. And she was so sweet. We were comparing sort of tumour sizes. She was like, oh, mine was 6.5 centimetres. And I was like, oh, God, mine was 7. And the one thing she said was that I am so pleased that you are the reason why I do this work, because you are an early stage survivor.
Somewhat international news now. Ukraine's president has shared CCTV footage of the moment a shopping centre in the central city of Kremenchuk was hit by a Russian missile strike on Monday. Volodymyr Zelensky says the attack, which killed at least 18 people, was deliberate. Russia says it struck a nearby arms depot and falsely claimed that the shopping centre was empty. Donald Trump tried to grab the steering wheel of his presidential limo when he was told he wouldn't be taken to Capitol Hill during the January the 6th riots. A former top aide to Mr. Trump's chief of staff testified that a Secret Service agent had to physically restrain him. Cassidy Hutchinson also said that Mr. Trump knew some of those who'd gathered were armed, but asked security to stop screening people so the crowd would look bigger.
The primary reason is because he wanted it full, and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deemed as weapons and our weapons. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here.
The Metropolitan Police have charged 29-year-old Jordan McSweeney with the murder of Zara Aleena, who was 35. The aspiring lawyer was killed on Sunday after being found with serious head injuries in Ilford in East London. McSweeney's also been charged with attempted rape and robbery and will appear before Thames Magistrates' Courts today. Shop prices have risen by over 3% in the last year. It's the fastest rate of inflation in 14 years. The cost of food went up by over 5.5%, driven by high fertiliser and animal feed prices. It's as businesses grapple with rising supply chain costs and a cut in household spending. The government has launched a review into short-term holiday lets in England, saying it wants to reap the benefits of the boom in short-term lets while protecting community interests. Properties could be subjected to physical checks to make sure they comply with rules on health, safety, noise and antisocial behaviour. The Tourism Minister, Nigel Huddleston, says the UK has seen a huge growth in the range of holiday accommodation available over the last few years.
People are expressing concerns about all of these people renting out their accommodation, inflating house prices and so on, antisocial behaviour, all of these issues. So it is a problem right across the country. So we're in listening mode at the moment. We've got a 12-week call for evidence. We want to gather that information and people's views and opinions as well. Do we need to have some registration scheme? Do we need to get some licensing? But it is a matter of getting that right balance between making sure we've got good quality accommodation offerings while not disturbing or causing problems to local communities, of course, many of whom do rely on tourism as a major contributor to economic activity.
This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Right, good morning, everybody. Action-packed show this. This is, of course, your show, but at the same time, we can't ignore, massive news as well. So Western leaders have arrived in Madrid for the NATO summit, where the ongoing war in Ukraine and containing the threat posed by Russia is right at the top of the agenda.
Yes, Sweden and Finland's paths to joining NATO look a lot clearer after Turkey dropped their apparent objections.
Yeah, well, NATO boss Jens Stoltenberg says they will increase high readiness force to well over 300,000 troops, the highest since the Cold War. And many of you, our viewers and listeners, have been getting in touch about this, and Defence Secretary, and about security as well, including Lee, who said...
He said, I would be happy to pay a bit more tax to build up our military. We will need it to defend ourselves. But has the world been too slow to react to the threat of Russian aggression?
Well, it's our viewer-led show, so our viewer got in touch, and it's only fitting that we put that to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who I was speaking to a matter of moments ago. Darren, good to see you again, my good man. Yes, so what's the latest that you can give us out of this NATO summit, then?
Really fascinating, actually. I've just been speaking to Alexei Gorgorenko. I'm sure you guys have interviewed him. He's the Ukrainian MP for Odessa. He's here in Madrid, essentially trying to lobby those NATO leaders to supply more weapons to Ukraine. He points out the very fact that there is a big, I think it's a 1,000-mile front line in the Donbass region, and that frankly they do not have still enough weapons from the West to try and take on the Russians. So he wants to see that as well. And while he welcomes that news that you guys just been talking about, the fact that Sweden and Finland now have a clear path to joining NATO after President Erdogan of Turkey essentially ended his objections, he's asking the question, well, what about Ukraine? Why aren't Ukraine being prepared for NATO membership? Now, that's very difficult. Clearly, it's very difficult for a country that's actively involved in a war to join NATO, particularly with Article 5, which means that if a country's attacked, everyone else has to essentially back them up. So there is still continued frustration amongst the Ukrainians, though there are lots of warm words from NATO about the solidarity towards the Ukrainians. We heard from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, yesterday, someone who's been accused of maybe being a little soft on all of this, that he was insistent that he wants to see Ukraine win, and there is no other option but from Ukraine winning this war. And it is notable that NATO are going to increase, as you say, the number of kind of troop-ready forces from around 30,000 to well over 300,000, a tenfold increase, and that will mean more pressure on the British Defence Forces as well, because, you know, Britain is one of the largest, I think it's the second largest at the moment, defence spender in NATO, so it will have to take up a big chunk of that pie. But it does ask those questions about whether our military spending is keeping up with our ambitions, because we've heard from the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, in the last couple of days, essentially saying that we need to increase the budget, maybe to 2.5% of our GDP. It's about 2.1, 2.3% at the moment, depending on whose figures you believe. But frankly, the government, the Treasury, seem pretty reluctant about that, because where do you find the money in the middle of a cost of living crisis? So I think this is a battle that we're going to see play out between the Ministry of Defence, maybe Number 10, and certainly the Treasury in the weeks and months to come, about whether defence spending should continue to increase in not just the years to come, but throughout probably the best part of this decade.
Yes, indeed. Well, Darren, thank you for joining us this morning and keeping us updated. We know you'll be joining us throughout the day to give us updates. But joining us now to discuss this further is former Defence Minister and current Vice Chair of the House of Commons Defence Committee and member of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, John Speller. John, thank you for your time this morning. What are you hoping to come out of what is being called a historic NATO conference this year?
Well, I think there's two things here. One is obviously the NATO conference itself, but secondly, the rather amazing spectacle we've got of counter-briefing between the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister about Britain's defence spending. Let's look at the NATO conference. I'm enormously encouraged that the Turkish government seem to have come to an understanding with Finland and Sweden. And who could have imagined 6 months ago that Sweden and Finland, historically neutral, would have been applying to join NATO and are going to be, I hope, warmly welcomed into NATO on a fast-track basis at this conference. And that's the doing of Vladimir Putin, who has made very clear to everyone in Europe the threat that Russia is posing to peace and stability in Europe. But then, of course, we've got the question of the funding. And the Defence Committee, under two Conservative chairs, but unanimously on both sides, have said for a long while we need extra spending on Britain's defences, because, quite frankly, the rundown that's taking place, particularly the rundown in the numbers of the army, just is not acceptable. Ukraine has made that absolutely crystal clear.
Exactly. Look, there's a lot to get stuck into here, John, but I just want to, before we do some of the other stuff, just ask you, are you a little bit gutted at how good Boris Johnson actually looks on the world stage?
Well, I'm not entirely sure how you say it's looking good when he's actually, having promised in the election that he'd increase defence spending. The Defence Secretary has been out there briefing in the last few days about an increase in defence spending, very strongly supported on his backbenches, but also by the opposition. And yet Johnson then has just sort of waved that away. I'm not sure that's a definition of looking good, especially when the numbers of in the army are being slashed and taking us really below a safe level.
What I would say is, I really do think when you see him standing there with those world leaders like we're seeing at this NATO summit now, the lot of them listening on radio, the usual types, obviously Joe Biden, etc., Erdogan, Macron, all these people, I think the British public will think, actually, we've not got a bad one here.
Well, hold on a minute. Whoever is the British Prime Minister turns up at NATO summits and G7s, it goes with the job. It's what you're doing to actually, give substance to the discussions. And you're absolutely right. Britain is one of the major contributors of defence capability, but that is being hollowed out. We've been warning about this for several years, And from Johnson's comments to the reporters that I've seen, basically he doesn't acknowledge that and believes he can carry on in the same way without actually, for example, abandoning the cuts to the number of soldiers, which is absolutely disastrous. You've had senior military, senior army figures warning about this for several months.
And let's just look to the future, and there is a real prospect that Labour could indeed be the governing party in a couple of years at the next time of the general election. If that were to happen, what would you want to see? What would Labour be doing in the area of defence to bolster the United Kingdom against threats like Russia, like China?
Well, I think that, and this is where we certainly would agree with the current government, for example, providing encouragement and welcoming both Sweden and Finland into NATO, providing support into the Baltic countries who have been seriously threatened before and clearly feel under threat. I was in Vilnius in Lithuania only a few weeks ago, and they are very alert to the danger. And so we would certainly be continuing that policy, and also we'd be supporting, as indeed are the new Australian government, the AUKUS deal, which is looking also at threats in the Indo-Pacific area. John Healey has made very clear the position from the Labour front bench that we will need the defence spending that meets up to those commitments. And so I think we're seeing Labour moving in the same direction, as I said, the Defence Committee and the backbenches of both main parties.
And do you think Keir Starmer is the man to take you into the next general election and represent Britain on the world stage like Boris Johnson is currently doing?
No, see, I mean, the idea that Boris Johnson is a sort of world-leading figure, I mean, it may suit a political narrative, but it bears no relation to the
I'm not hearing an endorsement for Starmer yet, John. I'm not hearing it.
Sorry, I can only do one sentence at a time.
I would have let him with that if I were you.
Absolutely. Keir Starmer stands absolutely in contrast to that, as someone who is cool and rational and is actually looking at the facts. Johnson is not only blundering around, but, for example, all these gestures of involving the Royal Navy in dealing with the refugee crisis across the Channel. When we did our report from the Defence Committee, Conservatives and Labour, people across the political spectrum, all said this is a ridiculous idea. And the military don't want it either. What we have is government by press release, government by gesture. I don't think that makes someone look like a world statesman. I think that, frankly, makes us look a bit of a laughingstock in the world, as well as the moves to sort of suddenly tear up an agreement that they signed only 2 years ago. None of that, however, should detract from, firstly, the quality of our armed forces, but secondly, also, the need for us to value that and to invest properly in equipment, but also in personnel. We're running short of sailors. We're certainly, and the government is proposing to slash the number of soldiers to a dangerous level. That's going to require a financial contribution. Frankly, Johnson should sort this out with Sunak and give some stability to our armed forces.
So, sorry to rush you, John. You know how it is. We've obviously a bit pressed time.
You haven't. I've got to go to a meeting with the German Bundestag. Right.
Yes, you do, but only at 20 past. It's 18 past now, so you've got 2 minutes with me. Right, very quickly. The last time that Labour were in power, they dragged our armed forces into 2 unwinnable wars. How can you justify Labour being on the side of the armed forces now? Very quickly. I know you've got a dash, mate.
Sorry, the last Labour government, in which I was a defence minister for the first 4 years, once again we had to redress the cuts that had been done under options for change. End of the Cold War, the Conservatives slashed defence spending, cut the numbers of soldiers, ruined the recruitment programme, and we had to spend that period actually redressing that and also re-equipping the Britain's armed forces. And it's the same with the Cameron government, with the nuclear deterrent. 6 years they dithered around, and that's why we're facing serious problems in the nuclear submarine programme. The reality is, actually, from the days of Attlee and Bevan, it's Labour that backs defence. The Conservatives talk about it. We act.
John, fantastic stuff, perfectly timed. I really appreciate you always going out your way to make the time for us here at GB News, even if it's usually a bit robust. Enjoy your meeting at the Bundestag. Right, so it's Parliamentary Assembly over there. John Speller, MP, and yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, I think of John?
No, of the idea that Labour are now trying to position themselves as being on the side of the armed forces.
I mean, look, I think it will take convincing, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It will take people some convincing. I mean, we saw that disastrous, pull out of Afghanistan. Who wants a repeat of all of that by going into to another war that does not have a good prospect of winning? Nobody. But Labour are trying to maybe look more like the Conservatives. They're both merging into one entity, isn't it?
Bland, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, look, after the break, do authorities take grooming gangs seriously enough? I think we can both agree that they absolutely don't. Absolutely. But let us know what you think, crucially. And why can't we just deport convicted foreign sex offenders? Stay tuned.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Another day of dodging the downpours. Heavy showers in places today, but not everywhere catching them. We should see some sunny spells. The winds are a bit lighter today, but it's still low pressure that's dominating our weather. This weather front has been bringing some persistent rain overnight across the Midlands. It's trickling its way eastwards and kind of fizzling out, but a damp start across parts of the southeast, northeast England and northeast Scotland from that weather front. And then we watch the showers break out, some heavy ones, the possibility of thunderstorms, and they'll be quite slow moving too. Overall, though, a much brighter day across southwest Scotland compared to Tuesday. And in the sunny spells across the east of England, temperatures could easily creep up into the low 20s, 23, 24 Celsius, whereas further west we're looking at high teens, low 20s at best. Those slow-moving, heavy showers will keep going well into the evening, mostly over northern England, the Midlands, but also southwest England and South Wales too. And then we're looking at more showers coming up from the south as we go through the nights. Some clear spells and temperatures will drop down to single figures, perhaps in some rural areas, but most towns and cities holding up in the mid-teens. And then Thursday, it's another day of watching the showers break out. For quite a few, it will be a dry, fine, sunny start, certainly across much of the Midlands, northeast England, but some showers quickly developing and pushing north across Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then look at that, developing fairly widely across England and Wales. So they will be hit and miss, but where they do occur, some torrential downpours are possible, particularly South Wales, southwest England in the afternoon, but also northern England and southern Scotland. Temperatures again highest in the east, low 20s. Generally, we're looking at high teens elsewhere. The outlook is for more showers on Friday, but signs of things doing a little drier across the south into the weekend, with a bit more sunshine by Sunday. Temperatures also just starting to tick up a little bit. Bye for now.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there. Well, a very good morning, everybody. It's 10:24. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christie's and Mercy Murky, right here on GB News, live as ever on your TV, online and radio.
Yes, now, an issue we discussed yesterday that's been doing the rounds over the last week or so. How seriously our leaders and authorities take the issue of grooming gangs? Well, given the cover-ups, apologies, and, in my personal opinion, pathetic, lenient sentences to convicted sex criminals, which I actually spoke about yesterday, I'd say they don't take it very seriously at all. And many of you, our lovely viewers and listeners, have been getting in touch to say you're losing confidence in the police and other authorities. Graham, for example, wrote in to say this.
Until the police are held to account and hammered, they will not have any motivation to act or snap out of their lethargy on this issue. And look, we're inclined to agree with that, I think.
Yes, well, I highlighted this issue yesterday about convicted grooming gang members basically using human rights to not be deported from the United Kingdom. Since being released from jail, a number of them have undertaken long legal battles against their deportation and are being quite successful, to be honest.
Yeah, they are. So many of you obviously were outraged and wanted to know an answer to a straightforward question. Why can't convicted foreign sex offenders just be deported? Well, joining us now to hopefully explain why is Ivan Sampson, an immigration lawyer. Great to have you on the show. Look, I'm outraged. I think the vast majority of the British public are outraged at the idea that someone who's done some of the most heinous things possible to children on an industrial scale cannot be deported. Why is that?
That's not true. Anyone who's convicted of an offence carrying more than 12 months imprisonment is subject to automatic deportation. However, that's subject to their human rights and protection under the European Convention on Human Rights. So everyone has a right to the respect for private and family life, protected by the Convention. So the courts, when considering deporting someone, have to take into account that individual's human rights on their individual cases. So where they have children in this country, or where they've got a partner, or a long length of time living here, that has to be taken into account. Now, there's a balancing exercise. The more serious the offence, the balance shifts in favour of the state. So any sentence of more than 4 years, that balance shifts in favour of the state protecting the public.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't work like that in practice, that you can argue, because we spoke yesterday about one of the criminals, a convicted sex offender. He got a 13-year-old girl pregnant. He is appealing he has been trying to appeal his deportation for years. He's been quite successful. It's looking likely that he will be successful. He was in prison for more than 4 years, and he's basically said, look, my sons need me in this country. I want to be a role model for them. Oh. Can you see how people would say, well, how can it be possible that this man who's impregnated a 13-year-old girl has served his sentence for those crimes, clearly not an upstanding member of society? How can it be that he's even allowed to, for years and years, be allowed to stay in this country and fight his deportation?
Well, you can't blame Mr. Aziz you're talking about using the law in his favour. That's his right and his lawyers to do that. This is the thing, though, that the Home Office have decided that they can't deport him. And the reason is Mr. Aziz has revoked his Pakistani nationality. Therefore, you can only deport somebody to a country where they can be sent to. Now, at the moment, he doesn't hold Pakistani nationality. He could re-accept it if he wanted to. Obviously, it won't be in his interest to do that, because in doing so, he'll be sent on the next plane back to Pakistan. But I think the Home Office were slow. What I've seen the difference is between stopping people coming back to the country and actually removing people. Jemima Begum, we were successful because we stopped, the UK government stopped her coming back to the UK. It's much harder to remove because the individual can then revoke their own nationality. Well,
this is the problem, isn't it? But this is a problem. Sorry to interrupt. We're a bit pressed for time. I just want one more with you, if that's all right, because this is a massive issue. They can revoke this. The other issue, I would argue, is that people in the legal profession are willing to defend them. And I think there's massive, massive questions about whether or not that should be allowed. And could you live with yourself if you kept this man in the country and he goes on and gets another 13-year-old girl pregnant?
Well, the answer to the question is, do we defend paedophiles or someone convicted of murder? Look, until a case is heard before the court, we can't be armchair juries. We can't be. We have a system of criminal justice system. You say, though, can't you? Hang on a second. Sorry. You can choose what jobs you take, though, can't you? You can say no. You can just do another job. You could just defend someone else. I can tell you about the solicitor-client relationship. If the client tells me they did it, I can't defend them. I can't defend a case. That's fact.
But he was found guilty.
All I can do is ask the prosecution to prove. But if a client says they didn't do it and they're pleading innocence, which Mr. Aziz is even claiming now, he said he's innocent, then it's the lawyer's job to defend his client.
OK. Oh, look, I know. I wasn't, trying to have a personal pop at you. It's just the profession. I mean, I must say, I trained to be a lawyer briefly, and I found it very, very difficult. This idea that this business of we can defend anyone, we have to defend anyone. It doesn't sit well with me. But I appreciate the fact that people look at it from different angles. But look, thank you so much for joining us. I really do hope that we get you back on, because you did explain a lot of that very, very well. Ivan Sampson there, immigration lawyer. How do you feel about that at home, by the way, ladies and gentlemen? GBViews at GBNews.uk.
I do have to say, I do vehemently disagree. I think in a civil society, every single person has to have a right to a lawyer, and you can't, because that's a slippery slope to I don't like your politics, so I get that. So I think it is right that everybody, no matter how heinous they are, does have the right to a lawyer.
I think it's fine having the right to a lawyer. For me, and just quickly, that my point would be, if I was a lawyer, I just don't think I'd take that case.
As in, you'd have a moral objection to
getting this guy off.
Yeah, but I think it's difficult, though. Lawyers take that into account, don't they, when they're training to be a lawyer? They say, look, I'll have to defend unsavoury characters, and that will be part of the job.
Absolutely. Right, well, after the break, we're off to a flyer here, ladies and gents. The Metropolitan Police has been put into special measures, believe it or not. We'll be finding out why. But before that, a look at this morning's news.
Good morning. It is 10:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The NATO Secretary-General says the decision to make Sweden and Finland members of the military alliance will happen at an unprecedented pace. It's after Turkey lifted its veto over both Nordic countries' bid for membership. The Prime Minister's in Madrid for the NATO summit. He says this is a huge step forward. Now, meanwhile, the US has announced plans to boost its military presence across Europe, including sending 2 additional F-35 squadrons to Britain and 2 more destroyers to Spain. President Joe Biden says he's responding to the changing threat. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have paid tribute to Dame Deborah James, describing her as an inspirational and unfalteringly brave woman whose legacy will live on. The podcaster, known as Bowel Babe, died yesterday, aged 40, 5.5 years after being diagnosed with incurable bowel cancer. A former White House aide has testified that Donald Trump tried to grab the steering wheel of his presidential limo when he was told he wouldn't be taken to Capitol Hill during the January the 6th riots. Cassidy Hutchinson also said that Mr. Trump knew some of those who'd gathered were armed, but asked security to stop screening people so the crowd would look bigger. The government's launched a review into short-term holiday lets in England, saying it wants to reap the benefits of the boom in short-term lets while still protecting community interests. Properties could be subjected to physical checks to make sure they comply with rules on health, safety, noise and antisocial behaviour. Right now, you're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.218 and €1.157. The price of gold currently stands at £1,491.87 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, the time's 10:36 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christie's on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
We certainly are. Now, levelling up was a key part of the Tory manifesto at the 2019 general election, wasn't it? Their manifesto said, quote, in his first months as Prime Minister, Boris Johnson has set out an agenda for levelling up every part of the UK. But, look, obviously we were massively overtaken by events, and we can all agree with that, with the pandemic, with all sorts, and now obviously what's going on in Ukraine. So it's not a massive dig at Boris Johnson, but people aren't convinced, obviously, that levelling up has happened, and they're concerned that it never will, like Chris from Teesside, who wrote in to say...
Rishi's levelling up dosh briefly made an appearance on Teesside and then immediately went back down to London. Well, it's been nearly 3 years since the 2019 general election. Do you feel that your area has been levelled up if you're in one of our northern towns and cities? Well, get in touch and let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Yes, well, here to talk all things levelling up is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, thank you very, very much for joining us. Now, why might people feel that the government isn't levelling up? I mean, have they actually shown any indication? Could they have done, given what's happened?
I think you're fair in your introduction, Patrick. There's been a lot on, and it's not been a normal period in British politics or indeed global affairs, to say the least. But there is now an urgency. And I had dinner with a minister last night and we were talking about exactly this, that levelling up is seen as just a slogan. It's a clever slogan, but is it anything more than a bit of political rhetoric? Is it translating into real policies? Now, it's interesting that Chris wrote in from Teesside, because Teesside, if you like, is sort of ground zero for levelling up. I've been up in Teesside a lot over recent years. I made a documentary for another channel I won't mention on levelling up and Teesside, because Teesside has received a lot of cash, as Chris says. You got the Tory Metro Mayor on Teesside, Ben Houchen, who's very well connected. He's very close to Rishi Sunak. There's been a lot of money going into the Teesside Development Corporation, taking a brownfield site, turning it into a place for investment. You've got the biggest wind farm factory in Britain being planned there, carbon capture facilities, all the rest of it. Famously, the Treasury is moving one of its sections to Darlington, famous old railway town on Teesside. But I think Chris is right. There is a sense that while there is some money, there isn't much money. If you're in the Northwest, for instance, outside of strike action, there's still very bad commuter lines if you're trying to get a train into Manchester. Buses, buses are so important to regional communities, particularly outside of our big cities,
particularly rurally,
getting you into the regional cities and towns. And bus services in Britain are often terrible. It comes up in survey after survey after survey. We want buses. We don't want, shiny new buildings. We want buses. So transport infrastructure takes time. Obviously, HS2, many people think that's a joke. It's a flagship levelling up. I personally think it will just increase the number of people who come to London. That's what high-speed rail tends to do. It will turn Sutton Coldfield into a suburb of London, part of the London commuter belt, even though people there should be commuting into Birmingham or elsewhere in the Midlands. So I do think the Tories have got a problem. I do think ministers are starting to panic. And I think a lot of those red wall Tory MPs are starting to panic. I would say a lot of the people who voted against Boris Johnson in that vote of no confidence among his own backbenchers were red wall MPs because they feel levelling up isn't being delivered.
And do you think that red wall will come down at the time of the next general election? Because obviously, as you say, the MPs for the red wall seats perhaps don't trust Boris Johnson as much as they did at the beginning of his term. But what about the voters?
I think that's partly down to Labour, Mercy. I think Labour is still, very, very distant from its core working class base. When the leader of the Labour Party can't even define in common sense terms what a woman is, then how can they possibly connect with their working class communities who are tearing their hair out thinking these people are insane? I can't buy my kids shoes and you're spending time on this. So I think it's in Labour's hands. I think the right Labour candidate, maybe, some people think it might be Lisa Nandy or an Andy Burnham, people who actually come from the north of England and are authentically from that part of the world, rather than somebody who fairly or unfairly is seen as a kind of London-based lawyer. Maybe they could connect more. So I think there's a political fight to be had here. It's Boris Johnson's to lose the red wall, but it's also Labour's to win. And within that political dynamic, there will be lots and lots of rows as we approach the general election, whether it's late 23, mid-2024, about whether levelling up is actually more than a slogan. You're going to hear that a lot in the future. It's just a slogan. And at the moment, there are few instances of evidence on the ground, as Chris said, even in Teesside, which the Tories have really focused on, to say that levelling up is actually happening.
Is there going to be an argument that we're too skint to do it?
I think there will be an argument that we're too skint to do it, but I would say, and I've said to, wrote lots about this and talked to many people on front benches of all the parties, it's not like you got to borrow money and spend. How about some tax breaks? How about some regional growth enterprise zones? How about if you set up a company in this part of the country, this postcode, you won't pay corporation tax for 5 years. Watch the money come in. You've got to be dynamic about these things. You don't have to borrow and spend. You can incentivise. And I don't think the Treasury gets that. I think ministers need to grab that agenda. I think Downing Street needs people who can formulate these policies and ram them through, often against Whitehall's tax-rising instincts. And I don't personally see anyone in and around government who's doing that.
Good stuff. Well, Liam, I think you've basically covered the absolute lot of it there, I think, mate. Fantastic stuff. And you're back on later, aren't you?
I'm on the money, Captain.
You're on the money! Yes, at 1 p.m. Good lad. Thank you very much, Liam. Great to have you on our show. Right. Well, look, let us know what you think about all of that, because I can imagine now a lot of you are going to get in touch and go, hey, look, come on, give Boris a bit of a break. There was COVID, there's the Ukraine stuff. I think that's absolutely fair, to be honest with you. But at what point does levelling up start to happen? And what does it mean for you? What does it look like? With the best will in the world, what would have to happen for Hartlepool, say, to get jobs there and stop this brain drain, the economic drain that naturally happens when people go down basically to London.
Like we're guilty of.
Well, I've done it, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ray, just one quick view. Ray has a suggestion or an analysis of levelling up. The way things feeling that levelling up will be achieved by getting to the lowest common denominator, we will all have zero. Levelling up does not mean necessarily higher, so he thinks actually we'll level up by just being all broke and skint.
Right, I suppose. I mean, that's bleak. What was he called?
Ray,
just keep your chin up,
not a ray
Ray.
of sunshine.
All right, just keep your chin up, Ray. All right, OK, seriously, it doesn't have to be necessarily that bad, but there's loads more to get stuck into today, and we're going to do it right now. We're going to go to Mark White, aren't we?
Yes, we are, and this is in relation to the Metropolitan Police being placed under special measures by the policing watchdog after what was described as a series of failures over the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, it's reported that HM Inspectorate of Constabulary highlighted systemic problems, including, of course, the tragic murder of Sarah Everard by police officer Wayne Cousins, the strip searching of Child Q and a failure to log around 69,000 crimes.
Quite an oversight there. Well, what impact will this have in practice? What does special measures actually mean? Well, our Home and Security Editor Mark White joins us now from outside Scotland Yard to talk us through this. Mark, explain to us what it means to be placed under special measures on the Metropolitan Police.
Well, it means, of course, that they will be under a whole new level of scrutiny, that the Inspectorate of Constabulary will work out a plan of action for the Metropolitan Police going forward to try to get methods of working in place to try to bring about improvements. You highlighted some of the issues of concern there, those 70,000 odd crimes that had not been reported clearly, failures falling short of the targets and responding to emergency and non-emergency calls, the ability to properly assess the vulnerability of potential victims, not recording stop and search properly in about a quarter of cases, which therefore does not allow a proper scrutiny of whether this law or this the stop and search power that the police are using is being actually used properly, and there is justifiable cause for stopping and searching the people they do. So a number of different areas, and of course it comes on the back of all those other issues around the murder of Sarah Everard, the issues where two police officers who were supposed to have been guarding the scene of the murder of sisters Nicole Smallman and Biba Henry in North London were taking selfies next to the dead bodies of these two young women. A litany of other scandals that have affected the force that led to the previous commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick, effectively being sacked from that role. There are still real concerns about the Metropolitan Police, and that's why they have placed it under special measures for the moment.
Yes, no, absolutely, Mark. And it's obviously, look, either way, this is a terrible look for, I suppose, our police, isn't it, really? I mean, the idea that the Met, which is kind of, I think, most people would see as the main police force in the country, really, because I suppose it is. But the idea there being special measures, I'm concerned, Mark, as to what that means for people on the street. You know, we had a lot of people already very suspicious of the Met when it comes to things like stop and search, and when it comes to things like, they're all out there taking the knee, etc. And now we look at it and go, actually, hang on a minute, do we think the credibility of our police force here now is shot?
Well, it's deeply embarrassing, of course it is, and for those officers, more than 30,000 police officers within the Metropolitan Police Force, it will be very disheartening because they're out there on the front line day in, day out, trying to do their best for Londoners and for people across the country, because in terms of the UK as a whole, the Metropolitan Police has national significance. It's not just the UK's largest police force, it's also the police force that is the UK lead on counter-terrorism policing. It has royal protection duties and involved in many other issues that have national resonance. So the fact that it is seen to be failing in this way is a real issue of concern for those working in the police force and for the public, the communities that the Metropolitan Police Force is serving.
Yes, well, Mark White, thank you for joining us and giving us that update on that story. Bad news for the Met, of course, and I suppose good news for Londoners if it leads to improvements.
Well, if the police force gets better, that'd be nice.
If it leads to improvements. Well, we're joined as well by Matthew Scott, who's the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Kent. Thank you for your time this morning. You're obviously in charge of the Kent Police over there. You're elected, of course. What do you think of this idea that it's a few bad apples, actually, and we shouldn't tar the Metropolitan Police by what a few individuals and a few incidents have done?
Well, to some extent, there's going to be a lot of police officers and staff who have woken up this morning having seen this report and been incredibly disappointed, because there are thousands and thousands of officers who will go out onto the streets of London every day, putting themselves in harm's way to keep Londoners safe, doing as best as they can. But what we've got here is, I think, a problem of leadership. And we've seen consistent problems at the top of the Metropolitan Police for some time. There is a rot at the top which needs to be cleared out, and we need some, I think, refocusing of the Met's responsibilities. I think the Metropolitan Police could be seen to be too big to succeed, and maybe some of those national responsibilities should be taken away so they can focus again on getting local policing right.
Now, look, forgive me, I'm not trying to be facetious here. I'm genuinely intrigued about this. A lot of people are very confused about what the role of a police and crime commissioner actually is. What do you do?
So the Police and Crime Commissioner is responsible for setting the police's priorities. We give you accountability for your taxpayers' money. We commission services for victims of crime. In London, your PCC is the Mayor. And what we have here, I think, as well, is a lack of oversight from the Mayor, who doesn't do this job full time. He effectively outsources it to a deputy. So with proper oversight outside of London, you see police forces improving, getting better inspection results, being able to do more for victims of crime. In London, we don't have that because it's just been subsumed into the Mayor's office and he doesn't give it his full attention.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask your opinion on that, because Sadiq Khan has written today pretty much blaming the Met and the leadership of the Met for all the problems, but he is effectively the head of the Met Police. Should he be taking more accountability and actually facing up to the fact that this has all happened under his watch?
You're absolutely correct. He can't escape from the fact that he's been the Mayor of London for 6 years. He will go out for a photo opportunity when something good is happening, but be very quick to go on Twitter and complain about something for likes when he thinks it will appeal to one of his constituent groups. You can't act like that. You've got to be consistent, but you've got to be giving this role your full-time attention. London needs a police and crime commissioner who's going to be giving them that focus and holding the Metropolitan Police to account. For the last 6 years, he's failed to do that.
Interesting, actually, when you think about it like that, because that was the kind of the reason, really, why I asked you what your job was, because I wanted to make sure that I was correct in this. Is it fair to say that under Sadiq Khan's watch, the Metropolitan Police, if we take everything he says at face value in that press conference that seemed to go on for longer than this show did, but that actually the institutional racism, the sexism, the misogyny, the issues with stop and search, all of this, they're his fault?
Well, they've all happened on his watch, and I don't agree with his assessment that, there are institutional problems with racism in policing, but there are problems that do need to be rooted out. He hasn't been strong enough in saying what things need to be done. In Kent, we have a very strong system of accountability with really strong whistleblowing processes, with firm action taken against people who are using WhatsApp groups and other means to demean other people and commit some of these heinous offences that we've seen taking place. He needs to be absolutely clear and take a full-time interest in policing in London to give it the proper oversight it deserves. Otherwise, these things will just continue, because you've got 2 candidates now for the Metropolitan Police Commissioner's role who've both been involved in the Metropolitan Police leadership before.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that the Met Police isn't just a photo opportunity outside some kind of trans-related cafe in Islington, isn't it? Because he'd be all over that. But, Matthew, thank you very much. Matthew Scott there, Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Kent. Important to say Sadiq isn't here to defend himself, but there we go. Well, I would argue that one of the reasons he isn't is because he would never come on, actually. But,
and well, there are people who'd also argue that, you know, police and crime commissioners shouldn't be elected. It should not be a political role, and actually that it, you know, should be completely apolitical. So there's that argument as well.
There is, indeed.
But now, very sad news. Dame Deborah James, also known as Bowel Babe, has died at the age of 40 after battling bowel cancer since 2006. She sadly passed away yesterday.
Yeah, the producer and campaigner raised millions of pounds for charity during her fight against this disease.
Yes, well, Alice Porter looks back at her life.
So I was pulling blood and eventually got diagnosed with a 6.5 centimetre tumour up my bum.
It was this no-nonsense approach to talking about bowel cancer which Deborah James was most famous for. She worked as a deputy head teacher when she was first diagnosed in 2016, and it soon became apparent that it was incurable. She was only 35 years old. Despite the grim prognosis, Deborah James was quickly praised for talking openly about her bowel cancer and began a career in broadcasting. In 2018, she began co-presenting the BBC podcast You, Me and the Big C, alongside Lauren Mahon and Rachel Bland.
I have the poo cancer.
The glam cancer.
I have the glam cancer. There's nothing pink about my cancer, it's just brown.
But besides the laughs, there was great sadness when Rachel Bland died 2 years after being diagnosed with breast cancer. Deborah James campaigned tirelessly to raise awareness about bowel cancer, encouraging frank conversations of the symptoms. But on the 9th of May, she posted that she was receiving hospice care and gave an emotional goodbye. She also announced that she was setting up a Bowel Babe fund, which reached £1 million in less than 24 hours.
We still need that reminder and that boost and that money. And so before I died, the one thing I knew I wanted to do was set up a fund that can continue, working on some of the things that gave me life. I just cannot thank people enough for their generosity, because it just means so much to me.
Later that week, she received a damehood from Prince William in her family home in recognition of her campaigning. Emma Campbell was a friend of Deborah James and spoke to GB News just before her death. She said Deborah James would leave behind a wonderful legacy for her family.
She is a pure example of a life well lived. You know, a woman who has chosen to step into every moment with its much courage and strength as she can muster, and continue to kind of live with hope and positivity and humility. And I think all of those incredible attributes will just be passed down to Eloise and Hugo.
Yeah, very, very sad stuff, very moving, of course. But yes, indeed, a life well lived. Well, look, coming up, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Get in touch with us about everything that we've spoken about so far. There's been loads of it, but I think it's best if we just get to the break. We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there. Good morning, everybody. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and of course, Mercy Moroki as well on your TV, radio and online. We're here with an action-packed show, all put together by you today. Wednesday, of course, is your day.
Yes, indeed. And make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But we'll be getting to those very shortly. But first, let's give you your latest headlines with Rosie.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. NATO's Secretary-General says the decision to make Sweden and Finland members of the military alliance will happen at an unprecedented pace. It's after Turkey lifted its veto over both Nordic countries' bid for membership. Well, the UK Prime Minister's in Madrid for the NATO summit. He says this is a huge step forward.
Vladimir Putin was hoping that he would be getting less NATO on his western front as a result of his unprovoked illegal invasion of Ukraine. He's been proved completely wrong. He's getting more NATO. This is a historic summit in many ways, but we've already got two new members coming in, Finland and Sweden. A huge step forward for our alliance.
Meanwhile, the US has announced plans to boost its military presence across Europe, including sending 2 additional F-35 squadrons to Britain and 2 more destroyers to Spain. President Joe Biden says he's responding to the changing threat.
Together, our allies, we're going to make sure that NATO is ready to meet threats from all directions across every domain, land, air, and the sea. In a moment when Putin has shattered peace in Europe and attacked the very tenets of rule-based order, the United States and our allies, we're going to step up.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have paid tribute to Dame Deborah James, describing her as an inspirational and unfalteringly brave woman whose legacy will live on. The podcaster, known as Bowel Babe, died yesterday, aged 40, 5.5 years after being diagnosed with incurable bowel cancer. Donations to the fund she set up for cancer research have now hit £6.8 million. Speaking on her podcast, Dame Deborah convinced listener Margaret Mukhtar to check out her symptoms. Margaret was then diagnosed, treated and survived bowel cancer.
I was messaging her, and she was messaging back. She had lots of followers, but she was just so kind and so sweet, and was giving me advice when I was in hospital, saying, what was your, what was the size of your tumour? And actually, when we met up, she was so lovely. She was like, come in the picture, let's take a selfie. And she was so sweet. We were comparing sort of tumour sizes. She was like, oh, mine was 6.5 centimetres. And I was like, oh, God, mine was 7. And the one thing she said was that I am so pleased that you are the reason why I do this work, because you are an early stage survivor.
Ukraine's president has shared CCTV footage of the moment a shopping centre in the central city of Kremenchuk was hit by a Russian missile strike on Monday. Volodymyr Zelensky says the attack, which killed at least 18 people, was deliberate. Russia says it struck a nearby arms depot and falsely claimed the centre was empty. Donald Trump tried to grab the steering wheel of his presidential limo when he was told he wouldn't be taken to Capitol Hill during the January the 6th riots. A former top aide to Mr. Trump's chief of staff testified that a Secret Service agent had tried to physically restrain him. Cassidy Hutchinson also said that Mr. Trump knew some of those who gathered were armed, but asked security to stop screening people so the crowd would look bigger.
The primary reason is because he wanted it full and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deems as weapons and our weapons. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here.
The Metropolitan Police have charged 29-year-old Jordan McSweeney with the murder of Zara Aleena, who was 35. The aspiring lawyer died on Sunday after being found with serious head injuries in Ilford in East London. McSweeney's also been charged with attempted rape and robbery and will appear before Thames Magistrates Court today. Shop prices have risen by over 3% in the last year. It's the fastest rate of inflation in 14 years. The cost of food went up by 5.5%, driven by high fertiliser and animal feed prices. While businesses are grappling with rising supply chain costs and a cut in household spending. The government's launched a review into short-term holiday lets in England, saying it wants to reap the benefits of the boom in short-term lets while protecting community interests. Properties could be subjected to physical checks to make sure they comply with rules on health and safety, noise and antisocial behaviour. Tourism Minister Nigel Huddleston says the UK's seen a huge growth in the range of holiday accommodation available.
People are expressing concerns about all of these people renting out their accommodation, inflating house prices and so on, antisocial behaviour, all of these issues. So it is a problem right across the country. So we're in listening mode at the moment. We've got a 12-week call for evidence. We want to gather that information and people's views and opinions as well. Do we need to have some registration scheme? Do we need to get some licensing? But it is a matter of getting that right balance between making sure we've got good quality accommodation offerings while not disturbing or causing problems to local communities, of course, many of whom do rely on tourism as a major contributor to economic activity.
This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's on your TV, radio and online.
Yes, and as it's Wednesday, of course, it means one thing and one thing only. Our show is dedicated to the issues on your mind. We are the People's Channel, of course, want to hold a mirror up, and you have not disappointed us.
Yes, all week we've been asking you to get in touch and tell us what you want to talk about today. We've got some very interesting discussions lined up with some expert guests for you.
Indeed. Now, many of you might remember the Edward Colston statue being pulled down back in 2020, dragged into a river by mostly a bunch of white people. But anyway, there we go. Well, now there will be a review into the acquittal of the so-called Colston 4. That's right. OK, so we'll have more details on that later.
Yes, and one viewer got in touch to ask whether we need to bring back national service and increase our military spending to protect our streets and even our borders. Well, we'll be looking into that later on in the show.
And education. If higher education was government funded, would people be more likely to go to university? And should we all be paying for people's learning?
Yes, that's all coming up and much more as well across the programme. And you can get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Right, now loads of you have been in touch over the past few months with your views about the pulling down of that statue of slave trader Edward Colston in Bristol during a Black Lives Matter protest back in 2020.
Yes, well, the Attorney General, Suella Braverman, has referred the case to the Court of Appeal to consider legal issues in relation to the four being acquitted of the so-called Colston 4. They're called the Colston 4, while the Court of Appeal will be asked to clarify the law around whether somebody can use a defence related to their human rights when they're accused of criminal damage.
Yeah, so the four cannot be retried unless new evidence is provided, but, of course, the Court of Appeal can clarify the law and review the legal consequences that it sets out. And joining us from the Royal Courts of Justice is our Culture and Social Affairs editor. It's Anaya Folarin-Iman. Great to have you back on the show. You were only on yesterday, you're on again today, I believe. So, good stuff. Yeah, what's going on here then? Really run me through it, because I was amazed that it wasn't criminal damage to begin with.
Yeah, so in June 2020, many people remember that at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, protesters in Bristol toppled the statue of slave trader Edward Colston and threw it into the Bristol harbour. Now, many of those involved in the protests were charged with criminal damage. 6 accepted a police caution, but 4 were acquitted following a trial by jury. And what was particularly striking about the case was the arguments that the defence lawyers had used in order to defend their clients. So one of the arguments, for example, was that following the campaigning that was done to remove the statue in years prior, the refusal by Bristol to remove the statue essentially amounted to a hate crime. So the judge allowed the defendants to essentially expand the boundaries of the arguments used to defend them. And also another argument that was put forward by the council was that, for example, it cost a lot of money, all of the criminal damage that was accused. But the arguments that the defendants said that was actually following the removal of the statue from the harbour and appreciated in value, meaning that actually it didn't necessarily cost the council a lot of money. But the third argument, and this is the one that I think has caused a lot of controversy, was essentially the argument that it potentially was disproportionate to charge them with criminal damage because it may amount to a violation of their right to protest and freedom of expression in relation to pushing back against what they argued was a racist statue. And this is the argument that caused controversy and led to Suella Braverman, the Attorney General, to refer this particular case to the Court of Appeal because she argued that it led to uncertainty in relation to the range of arguments that could be used as a defence when it came to criminal damage in relation to a protest. So this is the referral that is taking place, and this hearing is taking place over 2 days to really clarify the points in relation to what the arguments people can use in relation to criminal damage.
Yeah, I was quite surprised, well, very surprised actually, when they were found innocent. I mean, I think they were just a bunch of white hippies trying to speak for black people personally, which I didn't agree with. But I was confused more specifically about why it wasn't criminal damage. Yeah. This review, this appeal, won't necessarily retry them. It can't under the law unless new evidence is presented. So what's the best case scenario here for Suella Braverman? What does she want to actually see these judges say?
Well, the Colston 4, many of them actually accepted that they had damaged or enacted behaviours that many people would regard as unacceptable, but whether or not criminal damage as a charge would be proportionate in relation to their right to freedom of expression and the right to protest. And it is interesting, I had spoken to Laura O'Brien, who was a solicitor that defended some of the Colston 4, and she argued that Suella Braverman's acts were essentially political overreach and that she was essentially just unhappy with the decision that the jury made, which is an essential pillar of a democracy. And Laura O'Brien also argued that, for example, that we have to understand what Suella Braverman is doing in the context of the Police Crime Court and Sentencing Bill and the restriction of the right to protest. But obviously the Attorney General would push back against that, and she has argued that this is really trying to clarify the scope of arguments and that could be used, as she worried that this would set a precedent for future cases where there are similar arguments being made.
I mean, this is exactly it, isn't it? Anaya, look, great stuff. Thank you very, very much. I know you'll be all over this case as well as it progresses, so no doubt we'll be talking about this rather a lot. Anaya Folarin-Iman there. But this is the point, isn't it, really? Which is that, you know, if the law now says that tearing down a statue and dragging it into a river isn't criminal damage, then I'm deeply concerned. So I can... Well, so shall I just go out to Paddington now and do that?
Well, what I argued, I wrote about this, well, at the time when this verdict came out, and what I argued is, well, if a racist was to go down into Parliament Square, there's a statue of Nelson Mandela there.
Yeah, tear that down.
I'm pro-apartheid, I don't think racists should mix. I'm going to tear this down.
It should have never been allowed out of prison.
Chuck it in the Thames. Well, they did it over in Bristol, didn't they? Why can't I do it? I mean...
He'd have been found guilty, though.
Obviously, it seems so self-evident that it's criminal damage, but yet... It wasn't, but we have to accept it because
it's the enduring madness of this world that we live in at the moment. But with us to discuss this further is human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, who I'm assuming vehemently disagrees with what we've just said there, Peter. Great to have you on the show, as always. Look, I'm all for freedom of expression. And by the way, I'm not defending the fact that I think there should have been a statue of a rampant slave trader in Bristol. However, it's criminal damage, Peter. Come on.
Well, even if you take the view that it was unlawful and illegal, you also have to balance that against the argument, was it moral? Was it the right thing to do? And in the context of campaigns for years to have that statue removed lawfully, these protesters felt that given that the authorities had for years blocked the removal of the statue, they had no choice, because to have a statue of Edward Colston in their city was an affront to all people of all races who value racial equality and human rights. I think perhaps not legal in many people's eyes, but certainly ethical. These protesters were not motivated by personal greed or any kind of advantage or gain.
But where does it...
for a higher moral cause.
But Peter, where does it stop, though, that argument? I understand you're saying, OK, yes, if you put the legal stuff to one side, let's talk about the moral arguments, and you're saying it was ethical. Well, where does it stop? Because if somebody wants to tear down Nelson Mandela's statue, for example, which is the example I just used, or Emmeline Pankhurst's statue, which I believe is in Birmingham, I think, or Manchester, well, they can just do that if they think there's a moral case to be made for it, because morals are effectively subjective, aren't they?
Well, of course, each case has to be assessed individually on its merits. And these protesters argued that what they were doing was consistent with Britain's values of human rights and equality. Whereas someone trying to tear down Nelson Mandela's statue would be motivated by racism and support for apartheid was or would be inconsistent with human rights and humanitarian values. So that, I think, is the distinction.
Yeah, I mean, I found it quite interesting, though, that certainly, I think it's something Mercy's alluded to just recently, actually, which is, a lot of people getting offended on other people's behalves, really. And my concern is, as Mercy said there, where this ends, which is that if I went outside now and just tore something down and did that, do you think maybe that this is just going to be a one-off, or is this going to give a green light to people who, well, I mean, as Mercy puts it, are just white hippies?
Well, first of all, there were people of all races in that protest crowd in Bristol. And the sort of vox pops and surveys taken among people in the black community afterwards suggested that overwhelmingly black people felt that it was about time and that it was a terrible affront that all the lawful legal attempts to remove the statue had been rebuffed. So they were on the side of the protesters.
I get that, but is there not a similar thing there? So they'd exhausted all normal, I suppose, avenues to remove this statue, I suppose. So isn't that a similar argument as being like, gosh, I'm too poor to afford this food, so I'm just going to nick it from the shops?
Well, that is an analogy, but a bit of a stretch, because I think taking a stand in support of human rights values is different from something where you gain personally. Now, if it was me, I would have said, in the tradition of Mahatma Gandhi, if you break the law, if you believe in something so strongly, and if you think that morally and ethically you are right, then go ahead and break the law, but be prepared to take the consequences. And of course, that is what Gandhi did. He was jailed by the British because he broke the law peacefully and non-violently, but he broke the law and he paid the consequence. So did Nelson Mandela. They said for the greater cause, they were prepared to break the law in order to defend justice, freedom, and equality.
Many people would also describe Winston Churchill in that way that you've just described Gandhi and Mandela, and say he was fighting for freedom. What do you make of the vandalism that was done to Churchill's statue up there near Parliament during those protests and counter-protests?
Well, I wouldn't have done it, but on the other hand, Churchill's record is very checkered. You know, he ordered troops to put down strikes. He was responsible, many say, for the famine in Bengal, which millions died. He was, in many respects, some of his views were what we would now call today racist. He believed in empire, and he opposed the right of colonial peoples to have their freedom. So I think he was a great war leader, and I praise him for that.
Yeah.
There's many downsides to Churchill as well.
There are. Look, I can understand a bit of what you said there. I mean, Gandhi had some rather fruity relations with some dubiously aged girls, shall we say, and also was mates with Mussolini. So I think no one's hands are clean here. But just a quick one, John. Sorry, not this is from John, I should say, Peter. Sorry, just a quick one from John. OK, on the emails. He says, are you going to ask if Bristol Council will pay back the donations that Colston made? So it's one thing tearing down his statue. Do you think they should, I don't know, you know, wash their hands of him completely if he made historic donations or anything like that, Peter?
Well, I think those donations have been well and truly spent now, so I don't think they can need to be taken back. But many people would argue that what he donated was some form of reparation for the damage and harm he did during the slave trade. So I think we should just draw a line under it and move on.
That's John Tatchell there, as I've just rechristened you now. Peter, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. Peter Tatchell there, of course, human rights campaigner.
Yeah, well, I just, before we quickly move on, a poll, this was in The Guardian a couple of years ago during the Black Lives Matter protest. Black Lives Matter has increased racial tensions, 55% say in a UK poll. That was of 2,000 people from the polling company Opinion. I mean, if even The Guardian was willing to publish a poll that the majority of people thought racial tensions had increased as a result of that, did they really do more good than harm? I mean, I'm not...
Like Mao. Yes, exactly, yes. OK, well, look, after the break, we will be answering a question from a viewer. Do we need to increase spending on defence? Well, probably. But before that, it's your weather.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. A bright day for some with sunshine, but quite a few showers, I think, for many. And there'll be some heavy downpours out there as well. And one or two spots seeing more persistent rain. A couple of occluded fronts moving around an area of low pressure will provide the focus for showers. That low sitting to the northwest of the UK, and still a breezy day to come. Not as breezy as it was on Tuesday, but we're going to see some cloud and some outbreaks of rain for a time, clearing East Anglia in the southeast. Then it brightens up and it's mostly dry later in the afternoon here, whilst a mixture of sunny spells and showers turn up elsewhere. And a line of showers perhaps stubbornly continuing across parts of the southwest by the afternoon. 18 to 20 Celsius for many, perhaps 24 Celsius towards the southeast corner where we get some sunshine. But actually it's towards the southeast where we could see some more prolonged rain turning up during the evening and the first part of the night. Otherwise, quite a few showers continuing, particularly western areas, and then increasingly those showers moving up through Wales into Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Away from the showers, some clear spells, temperatures dipping into the single figures, so a cool-ish start to the day on Thursday. But some sunshine around, particularly towards the south first thing, whilst cloud and rain moves up through Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. And then once again showers break out fairly widely, a mixture of sunny spells and showers, those showers slow moving, possibility of hail and thunder in places, with the central and southern part of England most likely affected by those heaviest downpours. But where we get some sunshine, particularly towards the southeast, 22 Celsius, high teens elsewhere. Showers continue for a time on Thursday evening, and really it's a showery picture on Friday as well, with some sunshine in between. But the showers fade away eventually through the weekend, and next week looks drier. Bye-bye.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:25 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christie's on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
We certainly are. Now, the Prime Minister is facing a potential rift with his senior ministers and generals at the start of the NATO summit in Madrid after Downing Street indicated it would abandon a key manifesto pledge on defence spending.
Yes, well, Prime Minister Johnson has insisted the pledge would be met, but in terms that appear to differ somewhat from the manifesto pledge, which said that as well as spending at least 2% of GDP on defence, the government would increase the budget by at least 0.5% above inflation every year of the Parliament.
Well, Boris Johnson said this target would be met if inflation is measured over the long term, not annually. But one of our viewers, Peter, got in touch about this and he said,
why not bring back national service? This would solve a couple of issues. We would have a prepared armed force and bring down crime on our streets and elsewhere in the world.
Well, is he right? Will an increase in defence keep our streets safer and perhaps help with foreign threats as well? Or is it a waste of money which can be used elsewhere? Well, speaking on a visit to Crawley this morning, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, was asked about current defence spending by the government.
I think the first thing to say is that the Tory government has been cutting defence for 10 years now. And despite what they said in 2019 at election time, they're planning to cut 10,000 more from our armed forces. Now, we, the Labour Party, have always put the defence of our nation first and called on them to halt that further cut. What I want to see now is a reboot in light of what's happened in the Ukraine. I want to see the government come forward with a review, and that has to include spending, because they've obviously got it wrong over a number of years now, and I think they're beginning to recognise that.
Our Sir Keir Starmer there, leader of the opposition. Now, to discuss this further with us is Andrew Brooks, who's a former RAF pilot, aerospace analyst and an aviation author. Thank you for joining us in the studio again. What do you make of these arguments that are taking place at the moment in terms of increasing that defence spending to above 2%?
I mean, there's two basic points. One is everybody wants increased spending, whether it's schools, hospitals. So And on the other hand, they want to cut taxes. So I can see the dilemma within the Conservative Party. And second, dare I say, Ministry of Defence doesn't have a good record of spending money wisely. And again, there's a fear that if you just shovel a large amount of new money at them, a lot of it will be not quite frittered away. But
where would you spend it then? What areas?
Well, for example, we've given to the Ukrainians serious amounts of sophisticated missiles. Question, what's our stock like now for us? Should we go to war tomorrow? The answer is that the cupboard's pretty bare.
Right.
How do you get a lot of new... Well, a lot of these missiles, you don't just go to Amazon and order 10 dozen of them. They're almost handmade in Belfast and places. So again, that will take time to replenish what we've already given away before you add the stuff we're talking about now that we've cut back in the last 10 years.
I would have thought it was interesting. Who would have thought several decades ago that we'd be allowing the people of Belfast to make our missiles for us? But there we go. Shows our times have changed, doesn't it? But seriously, I'm concerned that Putin is maybe using this as a bit of a tactic. Actually, that he knows that we're depleting our stock over there, and so if we do that, and it's a kind of slow death of Ukraine, which I hope doesn't happen, but slow death of Ukraine, then he can keep rolling through after that anyway because he knows that we're all out of stock.
Exactly. So although we say we're right behind you, etc., be under no illusions that in giving away a lot of our stock, because we didn't have massive stocks anyway because of the cutback in the Cold War. The French are the same. I mean, the French is a vitrine; it's a shop window. We're, to a certain extent, are a shop window. We've got great stuff, but not much of it. And if you want to go to war for a period of time, you need logistic backup of a serious amount. And to be frank, we don't have it.
But what do you make of, so our viewer and listener Peter's question was in relation to national service. Now, national service has been suggested by lots of people as a solution to many social problems, to be quite honest. What do you make of bringing back national service?
Well, it went out in 1963, just as I was doing my A-levels, thank goodness. But in those days, you were really taking a lot of young men, and it was largely young men, as a sort of social service because we needed to pad the army out in large... Now, we've changed. The military isn't lots of, dare I say it, ill-trained people with bayonets. They're all technicians. You need to train them. Now, how many years are you going to do that? How many volunteers will you get for this? How many young people will, if you like, do it? It's all very well saying what a great way to stop crime, etc., but it really is, you can't expect a small service to take on what amounts to a social service to educate and train young people.
Should we do something? Is there not a bit of a halfway house here, though? Is there not a bit of a halfway house between, OK, a blanket national service thing, which I think is probably a bit extreme, and the idea that you go, right, OK, if you've been in juvie or something like that, or if you're not, if you're constantly in trouble, right, if it looks like you're heading into direct conflict with the law, right, you go into national service, let's try and straighten you out.
I had a friend when I was at school. He was a great guy, but he was just the sort of person. And the magistrate said to him, and I remember this, you've got two choices. You can go to reform school or you can join the army.
Right.
Question, is that a sentence you could pass today with all the human rights?
This is what we're looking at, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, he joined the army, and to be frank, he was a fantastic warrant officer. It made him.
Sorted him out.
But I suspect the lawyers would have a field day if you gave a young man or woman that choice. They'd say, human rights.
Yeah, they'd be identifying as a pacifist, I guess. And the men of my generation are completely useless, I have to say. Yeah. They don't make them like they used to.
They don't make them like they used to,
You're sounding old before your time.
No, absolutely. No, but look, I think there is a lot to it. I think there is a lot to it, clearly, because it's basic discipline as well. And look, it's not for everyone. I'm not saying that it would cure all of life's ills, but I think it'd take more people out of prison.
Yeah,
I think it would, and more people out of gangs. I think, they see a bit of money. Well, I don't know if we must get paid for it, but see a little bit of money coming in, see order in their lives. Maybe, dare I say it, find a male role model as well, which I think is.
You're going to say partner.
Important. Well, we can do that in the army these days. But found a male role model as well. And things like there's a lot of important, even learning how to iron a shirt, which is something that I should go to national service. What do you think?
Well, somebody's 1 in 10 prisoners at present is ex-military. And if you go on the street, a lot of the people rough sleeping are ex-military. They've come out with psychological problems.
Yes.
They haven't. What sort of trade is a man come out who's trained to kill people with a rifle? What MVQ has he got to offer? The answer is not a great deal. So it's all very well saying put them in, but we need to spend more money on them coming out.
Yeah, I agree.
Because our prisons are too full of, dare I say, brave men who unfortunately have fallen through the cracks.
Absolutely.
And the system can't cope with it. You talk to the average GP and see how many people on his or her books are ex-military who are coming with problems.
No, absolutely. The estimates are about 7,000 currently sleeping rough on the streets. By definition, very hard to get an accurate figure on that. And, you know, I've done a lot of work with the homeless military veterans, supposed to get priority housing and mental health care. That doesn't seem to happen in a lot of local councils. You know, our aftercare for the people that we send over the top to die, to fight and die and get blown up for Queen and Country is absolutely shocking. But thank you very much. We're out of time. All right. I could talk to you all day. I really, really appreciate you coming in. You should have a show. You should have a show. Anyway, Andrew Brooks, of course, who's former RAF pilot, aerospace analyst and an aviation author. But what we got coming up after the break?
Yes, well, some of you got in touch about education and whether higher education specific should really be funded by the government. Well, let's talk about that after the break. Complicated issue, but first, the morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 11:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The US has announced plans to boost its military presence across Europe, including sending 2 additional F-35 squadrons to Britain and 2 more destroyers to Spain. The Prime Minister and the US President are in Madrid for the NATO summit. President Joe Biden says he's responding to the changing threat.
Together, our allies, we're going to make sure that NATO is ready to meet the threats from all directions across every domain, land, air, and the sea. In a moment when Putin has shattered peace in Europe and attacked the very, very tenets of rule-based order, the United States and our allies, we're going to step up.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have paid tribute to Dame Deborah James, describing her as an inspirational and unfalteringly brave woman whose legacy will live on. The podcaster known as Bowel Babe died yesterday, aged 40, 5.5 years after being diagnosed with incurable bowel cancer. The Metropolitan Police have charged 29-year-old Jordan McSweeney with the murder of Zara Aleena, who was 35. The aspiring lawyer died on Sunday after being found with serious head injuries in Ilford in East London. McSweeney's also been charged with attempted rape and robbery and is appearing before Thames Magistrates Court today. Climate advisors are warning there is a shocking gap in government efforts to ensure homes are better insulated in the face of soaring energy bills. The Climate Change Committee's latest report calls for the government to consider increased funding for energy efficiency in fuel-poor homes. Its chief executive said the installation of insulation measures fell off a cliff a decade ago. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.217 and €1.157. The price of gold currently stands at £1,492 and 31 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there. Well, a very good morning, everybody. It's 11:38. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Miroki, right here on GB News. Yes, you guessed it, live on your TV, online and radio.
Yes, now it's Wednesday, which means we're discussing the topics that you have suggested we discuss here at home. And one of our viewers, Brett, has written in asking us a question about higher education funding. He has said this.
Yes, I think education should be government funded and recovered through tax modules, and access to education should be unlimited to anybody at any age. Yeah, OK, all right. I would have loved the opportunity to get a degree and still would.
Yes, well, currently universities are funded by endowments, funding councils paid for by taxation, and tuition fees, which are levied on students. And, of course, that is a loan, essentially, from the government.
Yeah, it is. Good. Tell me about it. But anyway, universities across the UK could be forced to cut the number of UK students they take. Here we go, Class A, and take on more international students, mostly Chinese, you would imagine, so that their fees are not capped.
Yes, well, with universities making financial losses amid the rise in inflation, it's got us thinking, should universities be funded by the government for free for anybody who wants it? That's what Brett is saying, at least. He thinks that anybody at any age should be able to go to university and funded through taxation.
Yeah, well, let's talk now to Professor Anthony Glees, who is the Professor of Politics and Security at the University of Buckingham. There's quite a lot to get stuck into here, actually, isn't there, really? Because just explain how universities are currently funded and how students are currently funded, though.
Well, the universities get money from the government. They also have their own endowments, and the rich universities get money from private industry and this, that and the other. But the backbone of British higher education comes from student fees, and they are presented in the form of loans, and these are absolutely staggering sums. The government spends £20 billion of taxpayers' money on loans for students. The value of outstanding student loan debt today is £141 billion. That's like 4 times the defence budget, which is £42 billion. But by 2050, and this is the really dangerous thing, the outstanding loan value is estimated by the government to become £560 billion of money. Much of it will probably never be repaid. And people need to have one phrase at the forefront of their mind: the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, which set off the world economic slump. We are completely crazy in this country about our funding, and we need total reform.
But this is it, because actually, I'm not being funny, but it would be better for universities in a way if we almost cut down on the number of people who went for them. Because when you start paying back your student loan, you've got to be earning over a certain amount of money. So if you're saying that this amount of money is never going to be paid back, it implies that your degree was basically worthless because you've never gone on to make any money.
Absolutely. We give almost 50% of an age cohort higher education. Now, when I was a student 50 years ago, it was like 3%. And maybe that was too low. I'm prepared to believe that was the case.
Yeah.
But to give almost every second school leaver a university education is madness. And the man, unfortunately, he's a great chap and great public figure and servant, Ken Clarke, is personally responsible for the most idiotic thing that ever happened to British higher education, when in 1992 he turned 34 polytechnics into universities overnight. And we completely lost sight of the need to provide people with good polytechnic education. Now, people go on about not getting plumbers and carpenters. All these things used to be taught in our polys. They were wonderful institutions. They were turned into second and third rate universities. And that is a complete mistake. What's more, our poor students have to pay the same amount of money, £9,250, whatever university they're going to, whether it's Oxbridge or a university that was previously a poly. This is madness. It is complete madness. We should change the system so that we have polys, universities paid for by the state, which are cheap but good, and then elite universities for those people who want to pay the real cost of them. But at the moment, people are being fleeced. And I tell you, in my opinion, as a professor of many years standing, the people who are being most fleeced are the students themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
absolutely.
Out of the COVID era, and they're people in our family forced to pay universities for accommodation they weren't able to use, never seeing a lecturer, never getting a refund. You talk about the mafia in Italy. I think you could start with many British universities.
Strong stuff.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Glees, for joining us this morning. I think there'll be lots of people at home who agree with you. It is a bit of a racket for most people.
It's a racket.
And you know what? I'm going to stick my head above the parapet and say a thing that is considered snobbery.
There we go.
Which is, if you're not clever enough, you shouldn't go to uni.
But learn a practical trade or something.
Go to uni if you're not clever enough. And this idea that we should mollycoddle kids and say, oh no, everybody should have an equal opportunity to go to uni. I'm sorry, but it's going to be a complete waste of time and money if you're simply not that bright.
That's it.
That's life. Go and learn. You can earn just as much, if not more, in another trade that doesn't, require too much intellectual capability. People do that all the time. It doesn't make them lesser of workers.
You see, I would slightly counter that by just saying that actually there's different types of intelligence, right? And someone who's, shall we say, book smart, as opposed to someone who maybe is more suited to a practical trade, I think are both intelligent, just in a different way. And going to study David Beckham studies at University of Staffordshire when you actually should be a mechanic is not going to do you any good. But I'm being shouted at
and I know which one I would value more, a mechanic or whatever.
Or an expert in David Beckham.
So we want to make time for one of our viewers. What better way to end our viewer-led show than speaking to one of our viewers right now? Hello, Rob Bright.
Hey.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for
He's bright enough for uni. Sorry,
yes, well, let's talk to you about, let's ask you to give us a summary, your views on everything we've been discussing this morning.
Hi, we've recently had this thing about school weeks being reduced from 5 days down to 4. Now we've just had schools being locked down for 2 years. Everybody who looks after kids says the same thing, that it's been deeply damaging to their education. Yeah. And now we're looking to reduce their school week down to 4 days. Shouldn't we be increasing that to 6?
Oh, that's interesting, that, isn't it? I mean, I think kids suffered absolutely massively during the pandemic, and we're seeing the consequences of it now. We're seeing that there's new studies that have come out to show that kids now are turning up at school. Some of them are unable to say their own name. They've had no social skills. We're talking about 4 and 5-year-olds here now. So one of them needed extensive physiotherapy on his legs because he didn't have the strength in his legs to walk around the school because he spent so much time in front of the telly. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be inclined to give them 6 days a week, but I think just a proper education, a normal education.
What do you think about a longer school day? Because my daughter's school day is 8:30 to 5:30. She's 7 years old, and they seem perfectly fine. I mean, the little ones at her school, they do 8-hour days as well, 5 days a week. They seem fine.
What do you reckon, mate?
Well, what about holidays? They're getting, 13, 14, 15 weeks holidays? No one's discussing that yet. maybe bring it down to 10 weeks or
Cancel
whatever.
holidays, make them go into school on a Saturday. That's the kind of education I want.
I mean, it's a lot for parents. We've just got to be very quick, Rob. I know it's short and sweet, mate, but just very, very, very quickly then. Is your main concern here for the parents who have to do a lot of the looking after, or for the kids who might now grow up thick?
Well, my concern is for the kids that are going to grow up thick, to be perfectly honest. We've got the Confederation of Businesses and Industry saying all the time that they're getting kids leaving school that can barely read, barely write, can't answer the phone, can't take a message on the phone. Now, how much good is that going to do if we put them on a 4-day week?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining us
Rob.
this morning. We've finished with the best Rob Bright there.
Absolutely. I enjoyed that with good old Rob.
Save the best till last. Up next is Gloria De Piero with the Prime Minister's questions briefing. So, see you tomorrow.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A bright day for some with sunshine, but quite a few showers, I think, for many. And there'll be some heavy downpours out there as well. And one or two spots seeing more persistent rain. A couple of occluded fronts moving around an area of low pressure will provide the focus for showers. That low sitting to the northwest of the UK, and still a breezy day to come. Not as breezy as it was on Tuesday, but we're going to see some cloud and some outbreaks of rain for a time, clearing East Anglia in the southeast. Then it brightens up and it's mostly dry later in the afternoon here, whilst a mixture of sunny spells and showers turn up elsewhere. And a line of showers perhaps stubbornly continuing across parts of the southwest by the afternoon. 18 to 20 Celsius for many, perhaps 24 Celsius towards the southeast corner where we get some sunshine. But actually it's towards the southeast where we could see some more prolonged rain turning up during the evening and the first part of the night. Otherwise, quite a few showers continuing, particularly western areas, and then increasingly those showers moving up through Wales into Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Away from the showers, some clear spells, temperatures dipping into the single figures, so a cool-ish start to the day on Thursday. But some sunshine around, particularly towards the south first thing, whilst cloud and rain moves up through Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. And then once again showers break out fairly widely, a mixture of sunny spells and showers, those showers slow moving, possibility of hail and thunder in places, with the central and southern part of England most likely affected by those heaviest downpours. But where we get some sunshine, particularly towards the southeast, 22 Celsius, high teens elsewhere. Showers continue for a time on Thursday evening, and really it's a showery picture on Friday as well, with some sunshine in between. But the showers fade away eventually through the weekend, and next week looks drier. Bye-bye.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.